With me in the studio now, a familiar face, Moses Acquah. Thank you very much for coming in, Moses. He's the founder and CEO of AfriLink, consultancy advising investors on the African tech scene. Moses, what made those numbers we're seeing rise so significantly?
So what we see is that open source is actually helping a lot of companies like the startups and also organizations to be able to have a quick deployment. And that is actually why we see that, especially when it comes to Africa, cost efficient is very important. And we've seen that a lot of developers are jumping onto the open source market to get solutions from there.
It comes, though, the numbers come from a relatively low level, right? This is what makes the increase so staggering.
Yeah, so actually what we see is that there are two different aspects of it. We have the contributors and we actually have the projects. So what we've seen is that in terms of contribution, like we saw, 4 countries are actually on the rise, about 40% increase. So we see that most often young Africans who are actually beginning to learn how to program jump onto this open source, contribute to these open source projects.
Which are international projects.
Exactly. But what we see is that these global projects actually gives them the good resume to be able to get jobs. Like, for instance, now Microsoft asking for developers, you need to show what you've done. And so jumping onto open source really helps. Whereas when we look at the local market in terms of projects that are actually relevant to Africans, normally it's a very small number, but the successful ones are actually very, very successful because they have a global approach, which is a global approach, but also meeting the local standards. Example is Usoidi and then WooCommerce. I mean, no one even thinks about WooCommerce as an African company because basically it was developed in Africa, in South Africa, with a lot of African contributors, but was addressing global challenges.
Which sectors are especially interesting for software developers in Africa right now?
So when we look at the service market, it's very, very huge because we look at the fintech, whereby there's delivery of finance. We look at delivery of transportation. Anything to do with the service sector is actually rising really much. That's what we've seen, a lot of developers jumping into solutions that are already out there and utilizing it to meet the needs of the African consumer.
You said open source, right? You mentioned it. It's very important, especially for the African jobs market. Is it just kind of an academy for beginners, if you will, or is it more?
Yeah, so what we look at open source, normally like the newly acquired company GitHub, which is now also for Microsoft, it's about giving the collaborative platform whereby people are able to use and share knowledge and also share testing feedback immediately. And so what we've seen is that most of these young wannabe developers jump onto such collaborative platform, contribute to have the resume that they need, but at the same time be able to also learn from others. I think one of the most important things that we see is that African developers should also start not only looking at, of course, the things that are also for the African market, but also global needs, because that is how we can get more contribution and also more projects that are coming from Africa.
Moses Acquah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.